To the common science fiction and fantasy fan, the Arthur C. Clarke rule is fairly well known. Sufficiently advanced science or magic would be indistinguishable from each other. Now, as a matter of principle, this simply means you can have technology do what modern day would be considered magic. And you can have magic replicate what science does. So, for example, flying, making phone calls, those types of basic things we take for granted with science, in a fantasy setting, they're literally doing the same type of thing. But what often comes up is in science fantasy, is it just people don't know the difference between science and magic? Or is it actual magic? And the reality comes, obviously, what the writer intends. But there's also another possibility that people, I don't think, are aware of. And sometimes maybe the writers don't necessarily think this way, but probably should. First, you do have to realize that for some cultures, there may not be an actual difference. Blacksmiths, to some ancient cultures, were considered sorcerers. Now, to the modern ear, this may simply mean they the ancient peoples were superstitious about what the blacksmith was doing. That is partially true. But it also comes down to is do they see a difference between science and magic? Not because they're not because merely that they're superstitious, but because of their in our world, in our modern world, we believe to be fake or magic to not be real, that we presume that ancient cultures would necessarily see a difference when the reality is the spirits are part of the natural world. For example, up until the Enlightenment age, alchemy and chemistry often were more as regional differences than actual differences. Chemists were trying to make love potions and turn lead into gold, and alchemists were doing real science. But as the Enlightenment came to happen, and people were actually developing the scientific method, actually looking at it from a naturalist point of view, they needed to differentiate between the two. So it was separated into alchemy and chemistry. The science fiction series Babylon 5 introduced the techno mages. Now, they're not the first ones to have techno mages. Theoretically, you can argue Star Wars did it, but that's slightly different. And I'll get to Star Wars in a bit. But the techno mages were described as using science to replicate the abilities of magic. However, some of the things they described, I don't think, even if they come up with a scientific explanation for what they're doing, aren't different from magic. Like the person displayed here claimed that he can use 5 words to make anybody fall in love with them, or 3 words to make somebody fall madly in love with you, and 3 words to make them go away without their heart being broken and have it a mutually beneficial separation, as well as a bunch of other things. That to me is magic. Now they could come up with the scientific explanation of neurological blah, 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 blah. Or you can call it a spell. In Babylon 5 Crusades, which was the spin off series, They had a techno mage as a regular cast member. At one point, a scientist aboard the Crusade, which was the name of the ship, was mentioning that it was nanotechnology. Something happened that it was nanotechnology. And she looked at the techno mage to explain to him what nanotech is. And he looked at her with a, "You do realize I know more about this than you do. That's one of the ways my magic works." And so she says, "Oh, right." Because she realized he is not a superstitious person that doesn't understand that a gun doesn't actually make thunder, but a projectile. He's the techno mages are more advanced than the Earth people. The techno mages, though they look human, weren't from Earth. So that made it kind of funny. However, we get to our good friend Thor. Now, they go back and forth on whether Thor was an actual god. But in the very first movie, when Thor says, "I come from a place where science and sorcery are one," he is talking to a scientist who he kind of knows as a scientist. He's also seeing modern technology that he would know that even though it would be far less advanced than what he can do, that they have flying machines, that they're capable of understanding technology. But he says, "I come from a place that science and sorcery are one." Some people would think that this may be close to what the technomages do, but I don't think so. I think he comes from a place that has sorcerers. Doctor Strange was, they knew they might be doing Doctor Strange someday. What I think he was saying is science is real, it is tangible, and it is capable, and they do not see a difference between science and magic, but rather their science has magic elements and their magic has scientific elements. In other words, it is truly indistinguishable from each other because the magic is real. That is also implied when the Ancient One was showing Doctor Strange the uh, diagrams of humans from various cultures, including but not limited to modern understanding of biology. The Jedi don't often use the word magic or sorcery. The one time that phrase was used was by Han, and he was actually kind of insulting the Jedi in A New Hope. But I bring this up because the Jedi, the Force is tangible. So things like metachlorines, I know is controversial among Star Wars fans, kind of make sense. They know Jedi are special. They know the ability to use the Force is not something everybody has. So with advanced technology, they can and should be able to figure out what the difference is between a human or a normal human or a normal whatever species we're talking about and a force user. Is Q a god? He claims to have the power to fundamentally alter the universe and he throws it offhanded. Offhanded. Was he lying? Who knows? Does it appear that he has a specific piece of technology? It appears to be a somewhat natural ability of his, so it's hard to say. Q is not just an extraterrestrial being, he is an extra dimensional being. He exists in a time and space. The continuum is not regular space. And they are capable of interacting with reality in a way we can't. The Conan the Barbarian podcast was discussing extra dimensional beings as possibly being worshipped as gods, but being said to not be gods. And similar to alchemy, chemistry, when I was discussing with the techno mages and even blacksmithing, what defines a god for this discussion? If they truly are beyond not just our planet, but not even necessarily using typical machines, but able to alter the reality to a certain extent at will, whether it's limited to their own environment or whatever. What makes a god? So I think some of the entities in the Conan stories, if they're merely extra dimensional beings or gods or whatever, I don't I think it's a distinction without a difference. Even if they don't interact with humans to be worshipped, but are just that crazy powerful, then is there a difference? Because how Egyptians see entities that we have that we have translated as gods, how the Norse see it, versus how the Judeo-Christian concept of gods are, there's clear overlap, but they're not all the same. So I'm not sure there's a difference until you define what the word God means.